Sigmund Freud's structural model of the psyche, consisting of the ID, ego, and superego, is a cornerstone of psychoanalytic theory. It describes how different parts of the human mind interact to influence behavior, desires, and decision-making. These components represent distinct aspects of personality that operate at various levels of consciousness, often in conflict, shaping our psychological dynamics. The ID is the most basic and primal part of the psyche, present from birth. It operates entirely in the unconscious and is driven by the pleasure principle, which seeks immediate gratification of instincts and desires. The ID encompasses basic biological drives such as hunger, thirst, and sexual impulses, as well as aggressive tendencies. It is irrational and impulsive, lacking consideration for reality, logic, or morality. For example, a person's raw desire to eat a forbidden cake, despite societal norms or health concerns, originates from the ID. The ego develops as we grow and interact with the world, functioning as the rational and pragmatic aspect of the psyche. Governed by the reality principle, the ego mediates between the ID's desires, the superego's moral standards, and the constraints of external reality. It operates at all levels of consciousness, conscious, preconscious, and unconscious, and works to balance competing demands to avoid conflict or psychological distress. For instance, in the cake scenario, the ego might negotiate by suggesting eating a smaller portion or saving the treat for later, aligning gratification with practicality. The superego represents the internalized moral standards and societal norms we acquire through upbringing, culture, and education. It consists of two components, the conscience, which punishes us with guilt when we act against moral principles, and the ego ideal, which rewards us with pride for living up to ideals. The superego strives for perfection, often opposing the ID's desires. For instance, it might forbid eating the cake entirely, viewing indulgence as a failure of self-control or a breach of health goals. Freud emphasized that human behavior arises from the dynamic interactions and conflicts between the ID, ego, and superego. These conflicts are often unconscious but can manifest as anxiety, defense mechanisms, or psychological distress when the ego struggles to mediate effectively. For example, if the ID's desires are too strong or the superego's demands are overly rigid, the ego may employ strategies like repression or rationalization to manage the tension. Understanding these interactions helps explain complex human behaviors, motivations, and emotional challenges, forming the basis for many therapeutic approaches in psychoanalysis.